Next item,
Yes, sir. Doug Lozen, representing Foster & Foster, will present a valuation report on the general employees pension plan. And I think, Doug, you also have the next item too, and I think the two are kind of interchanged in this briefing, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, very nice to see you. Thank you, Council, for the chance to be here tonight, to see you again. You've seen me a couple times, so I think my face is becoming a little more familiar to you all. Shouldn't take me very long this evening to give an overview and an update. I'm planning to cover on the two pension plans and then followed by OPEB. It's just a handful of slides, but of course, if you have questions, I'll be happy to answer any of those. So the first one we'll deal with is the pension plan update. And I'm going to deal with both police and fire in general pretty much at the same time. They're very comparable results. The first slide here deals with the really good investment return performance over the last 5 years and comparing that to the assumption for both plans. Until the recent experience studies we did for both plans, the assumption was 8%. But if you look at the bars, the blue bars are for general and the green are for the police and fire plan. And you want to compare that to 8%. So if you see that 8% line going straight across, that was the assumption. So for each of the last 5 years, both plans have beat the benchmark, the 8%, by quite a bit. General and police and fire were a little bit different, but we do a ranking. We compare plans. Foster & Foster, we handle the vast majority of the pension plans in the state. There's over 200. And the Titusville plans, the market return the last couple of years have been very close to the top of all the plans that we've seen that we handle in the state. So very good news on that. So what that has yielded, when you beat the investment assumption consecutive years in a row, then what you have is generally expected an improvement in the funded status. The funded ratio is, loosely speaking, a comparison of assets, money in the bank, compared to promised liabilities. And when you get above the 80%, that's generally determined to be good. And you can see that both plans have been right around 80 or above since 2014, and the trend continues to go up. When you see the funded status going up, that means the unfunded liability is continuing to decrease. As of the latest valuation, 10/1/18, the average for the two plans combined is 90%, and it should continue into the 90s over the next couple of years. So, going hand in hand with that, beating the investment performance and improving funded status, it's no surprise to me that the city's funding requirement is continuing to decrease for both plans. I'm representing this as a percent of payroll, although the city funds on a strict dollar basis. The dollars actually have been coming down too over the last 5 years. But this is a nice trend that the percent of payroll going back even to fiscal 16 was as high as about 35% for the two plans, and projected for fiscal 20, we're looking at around 17 or 18% of payroll, and that number is still continuing to drop. And the following 3 years after that, I expect will continue. But these are the locked-in numbers at this point. So the quick summary for the pension plans is the combined net unfunded actuarial accrued liability, think of that as debt, loosely speaking, that has gone down by $10 million combined since 2014. The combined improvement in funded status has gone from 80 to 90% since 2014. Again, anything over 80 is determined to be fairly good, and both plans are at 90 at this point. The combined city contribution in fiscal 2020 is about $677,000 lower than fiscal 19. Board-approved reduction in the investment return assumption to 7.75. So both plans were at 8% historically, and the city's funding requirement continues to drop even though the investment assumption has been lowered to 775. And finally, the funded ratio should continue to improve as an additional $1.8 million in the unfunded liability drops off in the next 3 years. So that is the update on pension. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer before I jump into OPEB.
I have one light. Member Jordan?
Thank you. I'm new, so I've
Yes,
got
sir.
questions, of course.
Be happy to answer.
I guess the general question would be, it sounds like to me that our pension is pretty healthy,
Yes, I would agree.
and you don't see any place where we need to change anything. We should stay the course that we're in right now.
Both pension boards adopted updated assumptions, and the experience of the plans combined with the benefit changes the city implemented about 5 or 6 years ago, that's all yielded the good experience that you're seeing. So I don't see a need for any changes.
Okay, and so as the pension continues to grow, and you say there's a good ratio where we're not paying out as much as what we have in the system, can you explain a little bit more? The liability for the city goes down if the pension is healthy. Is that correct?
Correct.
Tell me how that works.
Well, a liability from an actuarial standpoint is, in layman's terms, a today's dollar value of future checks that we expect to get paid out. And although the benefits remain the same, when you're beating your assumptions, especially in the investment return, that means the assets are doing the heavier lifting of paying the benefits in the future, and the city's obligation will go down because the assets are doing a bigger job of that.
Okay, that makes sense to me, for sure. All right, thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
Thank you. This is an easy question. You said funded ratio should continue to improve as an additional 1.8 million from UAAL
Yes.
expires.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit more?
Well, the unfunded liability is it's a liability on the books of things that have occurred in the past, but it's treated sort of as debt. There's a finite time frame to getting that paid off. It's not a forever number. And as pieces of things that have happened in the past, say not meeting your assumptions or prior benefit enhancements, assumption changes, things like that, have increased the unfunded liability. They had a finite payoff period. And we're
Okay.
getting to a point now in the last 5 years and the next upcoming 3 where those are getting paid off. Essentially, think of those as mortgages that are being paid off.
Okay, tell me what UAAL stands for. That might help.
Unfunded actuarial accrued liability.
Okay,
Yeah, think
That
of it as
probably helps.
debt, mortgage payment,
okay,
loosely speaking.
thank you.
Any other questions? I see none, and thank you for that presentation.
Yes, sir.
Next item, sir.
Jump into OPEB. Just a handful of slides as with pension, but a different creature. I'll just go through each of the bullet points in order and take whatever questions you might have. So notes on the OPEB. By the way, OPEB stands for Other Post-Employment Benefits. It's not pension related, it's primarily health care in retirement. First bullet point is the last 2 valuations continues to reflect the removal of the $500 per month cap for both tiers, 1 and 2. Second bullet point, the current valuation, the results I'm giving you tonight, and I'll get into some numbers in the next few slides, reflects updates to census data, per capita claims cost, premiums, mortality rates, and the GASB's 74-75 discount rate. What all that means is the liability I'm about to show you, we have to go through this exercise every year. It reflects all these changes. Claims experiences the retirees are making, the investment return assumption, assumptions for mortality, and so on. Third bullet point, there was a net position transfer out of about $600,000 or so that did negatively affect the fiduciary net position. Fiduciary net position is just assets on hand. And those monies were just used to pay for explicit benefits, retiree benefits. But it did lower the assets that you had on hand of about 600,000 or so. There's been ongoing discussions of funding policy changes, including tentative plans to increase OPEB funding. And the reason for that, and you'll hear that a lot from us as the actuaries and from your auditor, the more the city is able and has a willingness to actually fund, put money in for the payment of future healthcare costs, the better discount rate, the better investment return you can get. Meaning if you show a commitment to set monies aside, then GASB says, you know what, we think that you're committed to it, therefore we can give you a better interest rate assumption, and therefore the liabilities on your book goes down. And I'll quantify at least one result of that in the last couple of slides. Next slide. Summary of key results. This is always, when it's hard to follow this kind of stuff, I understand you, council has a lot presented to you, so side by side from one year to the next should give you some sense of what's going on. The middle column is the last valuation, 2017, and the right-hand column is as of 2018. So the first key result is the single discount rate. The assumption for investment return increased from 3.64 to 4.18. That's largely a function of prevailing bond rates, municipal bond rates. As interest rates go up, then the OPEB liabilities you can discount at a higher rate, which brings that liability down. Therefore, the total OPEB liability a year ago on the books was $62.8 million. And simply by increasing, among other things, but a lot of it has to do with increasing the discount rate, lowered the liability by over $9 million. So you see that 62.8 dropping to 53.7. The fiduciary net position, think of that as assets. Assets on hand was 2.5 million, dropped to just under 2 million. Again, most of that's just the transfer out to pay for explicit benefits. So the net OPEB liability is the total minus the assets, and that went from 60.2 million to 51.7. So again, on the books, a net reduction of about $9 million in the OPEB liability. OPEB expense dropped from 1.3 million to 250,000, and the fiduciary net position as a percent of total OPEB liability, 4% down to 3.7. Again, as you heard from the auditor presentation, you implemented GASB 74 and 75 early, so we're still waiting. It's hard. You don't have an apples to apples comparison yet because most municipalities have not early adopted. So if you have a question of how does this compare, there's not enough data out there yet to compare to other municipalities because most of them will be implementing the following year. Okay? So bullet points on this page, despite a decrease in the fiduciary net position, meaning the $600,000 transfer out, the net OPEB liability decreased. And again, gains from per capita claims, and increasing the single discount rate due to increasing bond rates. Second bullet point, under the current funding policy, meaning the city right now is only able to commit about 50% of the ARC, the required contribution. By doing that, we have to figure out, okay, what does GASB tell us to use for a discount rate? That is equal to a 20-year municipal bond rate. And again, that's just that 4.18%. Final bullet point on this page, increased funding on a consistent basis, this ties in what I said a few minutes ago, if the city could commit to funding the full ARC or even closer to it, you could get a higher blended rate, discount rate, that would bring the OPEB liability down. Essentially, the more that you can show the world that you can commit to paying for the OPEB liability and to funding it, the lower the liabilities on the book. So, final slide. Funding discussion. So let's quantify that. Just go to the right-hand column as of September 30th, 2018. The total contributions between the city and the retirees in about $2 million, benefit payments about $2 million, so that in and out. If you're able to commit to funding 100% of the ARC, look at that unfunded actuarial accrued liability, that $39.5 million. Remember the numbers we were just talking about on the prior slide? You're looking, the far right-hand column, net OPEB liability, about $51.7 million. Simply by funding 100% of the ARC, you could get that down to $39.5 million, because that would give us the ability to use a 6% discount rate rather than 4.18. Of course, there's a cost to getting that. If you want that nice $12 million reduction, there's a cost to that, and right now it's currently about an extra $1 million a year that you would have to set aside and fund for OPEB. So, questions?
Any
Sure you have
questions?
more than on pension.
Any questions? It is. Member Jordan.
Thank you. These charts are different than the pension charts, for sure.
Yes, different
Yes.
creature.
You said something that really caught my ear, and basically you're saying if you put more money in or you covered the ARC, then we will be in better shape. But if we don't have the money to do that, then we've got a big problem on our hands, correct? Yes?
It's, I would call it a balance. It would, the council has to set the priorities in total for the city. So I'm sure a decision has been made that, yes, it would be nice to put that $1 million extra and get a lower liability, but it sounds like you have so many other projects, you need that $1 million to go elsewhere.
Right, right. So if I'm looking at your chart that says funding discussion correctly, we've got about $2 million that the city and the retirees are putting in. But our liability is somewhere around, what'd you say, 62? It really doesn't matter when you think about it, right? 50 or 60 million dollars, that's a lot of money that we don't have.
Yes, now understand that 50 or 51 million or 60 million, that's not actual cash
I
that you
understand
need
that.
to,
No, I
but it's
understand that.
liabilities on the books under GASB.
Right. It's liability because there are employees out there who are looking to be able to be funded for whatever health needs they have, correct?
Yes.
the way it works?
The big picture of where that liability comes from is that retirees, even if they're just given access to health care once they retire from the city, by law, they pay a blended premium rate equal to what the active employees pay. They can't be charged anymore.
Right.
Well, there's an implicit cost to that. If you're only charging retirees who are older the same premium as somebody, say, 30 or 35 years old, well, we know the claims are higher as you get older.
Right.
And so GASB, going back probably about at least 10 years now, said, look, there's a subsidy, there's an implicit liability in the books for that subsidy. And this is where it comes from. Would be an actuary's opinion as to what is today's cost of future payouts simply by charging only the blended premium as opposed to the true actuarial premium for a retiree.
The single discount rate that we're looking at, yeah, it went down from 3.64 to 4.18. There is no guarantee that it's going to continue. I'm sorry, I said down, it went up 4.18. There is no guarantee that it's going to continue to go up. It could go down.
That's correct.
Right?
That's correct.
So,
And that's happened.
yeah.
From one year to the next, nothing changes except the discount rate changes and the liability can go up or down just because of that.
Right. So we're going to always have a large liability. We may stroke ourselves 1 year from the next based on what the rate is, but the bottom line is that we're not doing what we need to do. We can't afford what we need to do based on what we're supposed to have in the system.
And that's common.
And that's common with,
It's common that a lot of OPEB plans are not, at least up until recently, were not funded much at all, or only a small portion, a small fraction. But cities are now beginning to look at well, depending on the size of the city, if the liability is fairly high as a percentage of the total, looking at ways that maybe you need to start funding to get that liability down.
There could be a scenario where, because when I look at your fiduciary net position, which basically is the money we have in the bank for this thing, if I understand what you're saying, it's possible with the number of retirees we had, it is possible that we could use all of that money up in 1 year. We used
Well,
$600,000
what
last
depends on
year,
the
right?
policy.
Right.
I'd probably defer to Bridget on whether that would occur. But
She's coming.
I suppose it could happen.
I think anything could happen, but the way we budget healthcare in general, it's based on premiums, and all this trust fund is designed to do is to cover the premiums, the actual cost of the healthcare. And of course, those are driven by claims, but I think that every year during budget, we kind of have a pretty good idea of whether we can contribute to the trust fund or if we have to take money out of the trust fund, primarily to pay the premium costs. So as the premiums go up, it's possible we could have to take more than $600,000 like we took in FY18. But I think we do everything we can in our power to add to the trust fund and not take from the trust fund, which is why you'll see things coming up like plan design changes, other options for the city, because we cannot continue to utilize this at this level to pay for premiums.
All right.
It's not sustainable.
So do you have a crystal ball of what you think is going to happen next year?
Not yet, we're just starting the budgeting process.
Yeah. But it's not going to decrease. Insurance is not going to decrease.
No, but I
so.
do think that our intention is to try to fund the implicit and explicit costs of the ARC to some degree. In the 19 budget, you weren't around for that, but the rest of y'all were. We did fund the ARC more. I think we funded about 50% of the ARC in the 19 budget. Our intention for next year's budget, if everything works out, is to try to fund at least 50% of the ARC. I don't know if we're going to get to the full ARC because there's other demands on those dollars, but our intention is to try to establish some kind of regular increased funding level for the ARC just to help get that discount rate up. That's about all we can do short of changes in healthcare plans in general. We can either control revenues or control expenses. That's all we can do.
But normally when you change healthcare plans, you take away from the employees. It's been my experience,
Yeah.
working out at the Space Center for 32 years, when we're looking for more, they take away more for us to afford whatever health we have, and it ends up being a hollow healthcare plan.
Or you
is
give
what
them
I'm thinking.
options, and they choose what option they want.
Right, and then they have to pay more for those options. It'll be
So-
up to
and
them.
I think that's what
right?
we're looking at now, or options. But the other thing with retiree healthcare plan is, we pay for those premiums. And so since that cap was lifted, that was a big thing that increased this
Right.
liability. So
Right.
that's another part. Healthcare plan design is one component of it, but also what the city is paying is another component, and then their contribution rates, the third component of it, so.
Right. So let me make sure I understand. You're saying that we're paying the premiums, and right now where are we? How much are we paying right
What are
now?
the premiums? Do you know? Yeah. I don't have the monthly premiums.
But it's more than,
memorized, but
it's more
Joe
than
does.
$500.
Just under the $600 per member per month, about $570.
Yes, I think it's 583, and then I think, yeah, and then I think next year we're planning on going over 600, probably low 600s.
So in the next 5 years, it could go up 20, 25%, easy.
Possibly.
That's not good.
No.
Okay, so we're going to come up with a plan to try to relieve ourselves, right? Because, part of financing this is also trying to finance things that we need to continue to grow in the city, for sure. So, and that's our obligation too, for sure. So, all right, thank you so much.
Vice Mayor?
We won't really know where we stack up apples to apples until everybody else in the municipalities get on SCASB 7.
Yes.
Good, we are, we're at least 2 years out in front of everybody else on that, or a year?
I think about a year.
All right, and so I look forward to seeing more of the apples to apples, because, again, Some of that actuary stuff is very confusing to me. But I do have a real simple question I think I understand. I think it's slide 4. OPEB expense, $1,375,000 in 217, just kind of caught my eye, down to $250,528 in 18. That's quite a decrease. I'm just curious what that is exactly.
That's all of the components that went into decreasing the liability as well. Claims experience, which was favorable, discount rate, which was favorable, going up, mortality changes. All of the favorable that brought the liability in total down also brought the expense down. But under GASB is very volatile. And pension, you have a lot less volatility. If we say 1 year the city has to put in 17% of payroll, you generally should be plus or minus 2% of payroll from 1 year to the next, because those plans pension is funded. GASB looks at OPEB and says largely not funded. You're just kind of at the whim of experience and assumptions from 1 year to the next. So I could next year at this time add a column for 2020 or 2019, and you could have a completely different answer one way or the other. It's very volatile.
And there's really not a way you can say how we compare to other municipalities, as you really kind of did with said how well we're doing in our investments compared to other municipalities, top 9 or 10%, I think you said. But we really can't tell here because our numbers aren't the same.
On the discount rate for OPEB, I would say you're probably fairly similar. But as far as the claims experience and other things that go into it, other assumptions, those are unknown yet.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, could I just add to that? One of the things we know, because I know we've talked to the auditors and we've kind of called around and done our own little kind of informal surveys, but just from even speaking with the auditors, we're your only client, right? That you can, in this area at least, but we're a handful of clients that have that explicit benefit. And that's a big cost driver for us. And so it'll be interesting. And I think that's why we started getting all these questions when we were financing our vehicles and things this year, because other cities and municipalities have implemented this GASB, but our liabilities are so much higher because we are an outlier with that explicit benefit. So I think this time next year, if we have comparisons that the actuaries and people come with, I'm going to expect that we're going to be one of the higher ones, just because we have a benefit that a lot of people don't have.
A lot of cities moved away from explicit when GASB came out with what was at first 43.45 and now 74.75. Up until then, cities were, we'll cover your premium as you go into retirement. Then they saw these liabilities and they moved away and said, no, you just have access to it. But even then, only having access is still a liability because the full premium, the actuarial premium, isn't being covered.
Yeah, we recognize we've been dealing with this for a number of years, not all of us on here, that there are some reckonings that are coming up, and it doesn't look as it is a positive situation, as you already said, Bridget. So we have one more, Member Jordan.
And just want you to know this is real close to my heart. As an entrepreneur myself, when I look at something like this, if this was my business, it would scare the life out of me because I wouldn't be able to afford what I need to afford to grow my business. And our focus up here, of course, is to make sure that this city is healthy, in not only the financial side, but also as far as the economic side and just the way people live around here. So I think we're going to have a lot of discussion about this, and we've got to get on the right track for sure. You were talking about the ARC and saying, and Bridget, right, said that we're going to try to do 50%, but if we did 50%, what would that look like? Is that?
Well, you're doing 50% now.
Okay,
The results
so-
you see now are based on 50%.
So how would we look, or is that look on favorably that we're doing 50%? I'm assuming they.
No,
like
if you
us
wanted to compare, that's, I think, actually not too bad. I mean, a lot of municipalities are not even putting in 50%.
but a lot of municipalities aren't in the position we're in either, as far as the liability
It's
is
all
concerned.
over. It depends. It really depends. But the one thing that you have heard that is kind of unique here, if not, it's not entirely unique, but it's up there, is the city's covering the full cost, the explicit, the city's paying that premium. And that is, a lot of municipalities moved away from that in the last 5 to 10 years.
Of course, a simple question I would ask is, why didn't we move away from it? You don't have to answer that.
I don't have that answer.
All right. Thank you, sir.
You really can't.
Rhetorical, I understand.
But you make some good points, though, Jordan.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other lights, so thank you, sir, and thank you for your presentation.
Good to see you all again. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like